Vent Audrey stopped writing after she finished sharing some interesting news and scandals about aristocrats. She then adopted a serious pose as she recalled something. With her exceptional memory as a spectator, she arranged the information that she had received from her father's teachings, as well as the news she heard during banquets and salons, into paragraphs. After creating a draft in her head, Audrey penned, "As for the political situation in Backland you asked about, it's not within my area of interest. I can describe it to you only based on my own impressions and the details that I happen to know. Some time ago, Father told me that after the abolishment of the Grain Act, the prices of crops were declining rapidly. The rent of farmland and pastures were also plunging, but I don't know the exact magnitude. I can only explain it to you with this example. As you know, Duke Negan is an aristocrat who owns the most land outside of the royal family. It's said that he owns more than 12,000,000 pounds worth of farmland, pastures, and forests. Last year, his land earned him historic £1,300,000 in rent. But this year, it's forecast that his rent will only be £850,000, a whole £450,000 less. That's more than the entirety of the assets that I'm entitled to. Without any further explanation from me, I'm sure that my dear brother will understand the behavior of most old-fashioned nobles. They're proud of being landowners, and their income is derived mostly from rent. They place a heavy emphasis on their appearance and would maintain their current lifestyle even if they have to go into debt. They spend tens of thousands of pounds on the upkeep of their castles each year, many more thousands on clothes and jewelry, as well as their persistent hunting activities, social banquets, and the occasional lavish weddings and funerals, etc., etc. With the decrease in rent, according to my knowledge, a good portion of the nobles have met with financial difficulties. Because of this, Count Wolf has sold 84,000 areas of land in the countryside and gotten £29,000 in return. Viscount Conrad has also sold his art collection worth £55,000 to a national art gallery. Other than a few visionary nobles who had long shifted their focus to steel, coal, railroads, banks, and rubber industries, the rest of the nobles have been severely affected by the Grain Act. Let us praise our dear Count Hall. Father told me that the financial distress will loosen the control the nobles have over politics. As you can imagine, the number of ministers with blue blood will decline from the next year onward. In a bid to secure funding, the Conservative Party and the New Party have promised to confer upon anyone the noble titles as long as they donate a sufficient amount of money and lack any criminal records. Of course, the caveat is that the person who donated the money must own an amount of land befitting of a noble. One example is the rich Mr. Sindra. He purchased the lowest area of land expected of a baron, 60,000 aries, then donated £100,000 to the Carlton Club and £400,000 to the Conservative Party, and donations to charity amounting to £300,000. Finally, he succeeded in receiving conferment from His Majesty and became a highly regarded baron. I've heard that there's a price list to this, £300,000 to become a baron and £700,000 to £1,000,000 for a hereditary baron. There is no clear price for the title of Viscount or Count, but I'm sure those are sufficiently ridiculous. This year, many nobles who are facing financial difficulties are starting to seriously consider the possibility of marriages with wealthy merchants. There have already been 3 marriages like this over the last 2 months. The betrothal gifts the noble women received are something to be envied. Also, the workers who protested the Grain Act did experience a decrease in the cost of living, but the quality of their lives has not improved. Instead, it seems to have deteriorated as the bankrupt farmers have entered the city and stolen their jobs by requesting lower wages. Thus, the wages of the laborers are dropping rapidly. It remember the day when Father asked me who I felt was the winner of the Grain Act. My dear Alfred, you must know the answer. You would definitely be able to obtain hereditary baron title through your own efforts. Zio Dericha and Fors Wall were returning to the Backland Bridge Borough after they received Audrey's reply. Zio, with her messy blonde hair, was looking out the window of the carriage. Her eyes were bright like 2 burning balls of flame. She muttered the term £450 to herself repeatedly, as if reciting an incantation. Her strength and courage grew every time she repeated the term. Darkholme hasn't reported the status of the investigation today. Let's make a trip to his house. Zio suddenly turned to look at Ford. Darkholme was the leader of a triad in the Backland East Borough, and had control over many beggars and thieves. Even though he looked very friendly with his chubby face that was perpetually adorned with a warm and amiable smile, Zio knew that he was a merciless scoundrel. He once broke the arm of a 13-year-old thief because the boy had hidden his profit. Unless it was necessary, Zio was unwilling to meet Darkholme, but Darkholme was one of the few people who were most familiar with the vagrants in the city. Fors pushed her slightly curly hair back behind her ear. "As long as it doesn't delay my lunch." "No problem. Perhaps I could treat you to an Inti's feast after this week," Zio promised in complacency. "Must I thank God?" Fors asked as she laughed. Unlike Zio, Fors was a moderate believer of the god of steam and machinery. As they conversed, the two ladies switched to another public carriage and arrived at the Backland East Borough and arrived at Darkholme's house. It was a terrace house located in a narrow alley. There were green plants hanging from the walls. The exterior looked relatively unkempt. Zio walked to the door, raised her right hand and knocked in a unique rhythm. The unlocked door opened with a creak following her knocks. Zio's apparently confused expression immediately turned stern, like a wary lion. She took out a bayonet she carried with her and cautiously pushed open the door. She then slowly stepped inside. Fors also stopped looking nonchalant, having produced a dagger of unknown origin. They didn't smell any peculiar scents, but their rich experience told them that something was off. 1 step, 2 step, 3 steps. Zio and Fors entered Darkholme's house. Then they saw a pale limb on a gas lamp, internal organs on a coffee table, as well as strips upon strips of flesh strewn on the floor and hung on the clothes rack. Pieces of bone had been stripped clean and piled up near the door. And amongst the bones was a head, its vacant eyes open. It was none other than Darkholme. His chubby face still maintained the amiable smile, as if everything was normal. Furthermore, there was no stench of blood in the house. As a former clinical doctor before becoming a best-selling author in Sequence 9 Beyonder, Fors has seen many death scenes more disgusting than this. She patted the tense Zio, who was on the brink of vomiting as she surveyed the surroundings. Kalangos. Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. He realized that Darkholme was investigating the missing vagrants and tracked him back to his house. Or could it be said that Darkholme had tracked him down, but ended up being caught? Zio fought back the urge to retch and said with a serious expression, "He sure lives up to his name as a merciless and crafty pirate admiral." The strangeness here also fits the description of his treasure. Crafty. Fors was suddenly alarmed as she blurted out, could he be waiting nearby in an ambush against the mastermind behind the investigation? Zio froze for a moment before answering in a fluster, "That's highly likely." He was a Sequence 6 wind-blessed, a powerful pirate with a mystical artifact, while they were just 2 Sequence 9. This was an extremely simple and easy contrast. In the house opposite Darkholme's house, a man with a unique broad chin and dark green eyes in his 30s was standing by the window, coldly observing Zio's and Fors' opening of the door and slow entry. He was none other than Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. The black glove on his left hand twitched as if it were alive. A layer of dull gold scales appeared on its surface. Kalangos revealed a cruel and joyous expression, as his dark green eyes turned pale gold and indifferent. The moment Fors realized this, she dragged Zio to the other side and avoided the area just across the main door. She then gritted her pearly white teeth and took out a bracelet that was hidden by her sleeve. This silver bracelet had 3 dark green, coarse stones which showed signs of burn marks and were rough and uneven. Fors pulled out one of the stones and let out a low growl in ancient Hermes. "Door." She grabbed onto Zio Dericha tightly, as the stone released a faint blue glow. The figures of the two ladies turned indistinct, nearly invisible. They saw many forms they found difficult to describe. There were even transparent objects that didn't seem to exist. They saw different colors, lustrous splendors which seemed to possess immense knowledge. They had entered the mysterious spirit world. In this strange world that stood distinct from reality, Fors proceeded in a particular direction while pulling Zio along. Seconds later, they exited their indistinct states and returned to reality, to Backland. But they were no longer at Darkholme's house, but instead arrived at an empty cemetery. Kalangos, who was wearing his scaled glove, silently appeared at the door of Darkholme's house. He swept the interior with his cold gaze. He froze for a moment, then creased his brows as he muttered to himself, "Traveler." "In the cemetery. What are we going to do next?" Fors panted, sensing their predicament and feeling a lingering sense of fear. The bracelet was a mystical item she had received along with the formula for apprentice, and its corresponding materials back during a fortuitous encounter of her. Other than causing her to hear strange, faint murmurings during the full moon every month, it posed no threat. There were originally 5 stones on the bracelet, each stone allowing her to traverse through the spirit world, technically allowing her to teleport. But now there were only 2 stones left. Zio calmed herself down and nodded solemnly. First notify Miss Audrey, then we call the police. Ideas call the police. For's Wall repeated in surprise. The Beyonders, lodging a police report seemed to be something of another world. Zio paced back and forth as she tugged her coarse blonde hair. The scene of Darkholm's death is harrowing and creepy. As long as the police aren't blind, they would definitely pass the case on to the mandated punishers, the Nighthawks, the Machinery Hivemen, or the Special Department of the military. When that happens, we can leak some more information and let them know that the murderer is Kalangos. At that point, the entire city will be chasing after him. Our goal is only to look for Kalangos, not to capture him. With the help of so many Beyonders, things would become much simpler and safer. Once Kalangos panics and makes a mistake, it would be our chance to claim our bounty. Heh, I'm referring to the discovery of his whereabouts. Zio laughed dryly and looked at the appalled Fours. Do you think that the only way I know to deal with problems is by charging into them head first? The difference between us and Kalangos is as vast as the Daisy Bay. Fours nodded slowly and said, your understanding of yourself is absolutely right. You've done too many things of a similar nature. Hence, the losses that you've suffered is sufficient for you to advance to Sequence 8. Luckily, you're still rational enough regarding this matter. Zio lowered her head to look at her bayonet. She thought for a moment and said, I have to be honest. I clearly sensed the approach of death earlier. Kalangos was no doubt nearby. That was an aura evil enough to destroy us at any time. That triggered an instinctual response in me. Ors wore her silver bracelet that had 2 stones left and thought seriously. T agree with your idea. Let's inform Miss Audrey first and lodge the police report after. Yes, regardless if it was Darkholm or his underlings who found Kalangos' traces, we could continue to investigate with that approach and find out Kalangos' activity range and the location of his residence. Zio creased her slim blonde eyebrows and said, but Kalangos would definitely not remain in the same place. Even as one of the 7 pirate admirals, even if he had the assistance of a mystical artifact, Kalangos had to be extremely careful in Backland. Even Nast, the king of the 5 seas, had once encountered disaster here and was nearly caught. No, what I meant was, to surmise or confirm the purpose of Kalangos' visit to Backland based on the clues. Once we know what he's trying to do, no matter how he disguises himself or what tricks he pulls, he'll be exposed to us in the end. Then our mission would be accomplished, Fors explained in detail. 2 years of novel writing experience tells me that things would become simple once we grasp the crux of the matter. Zio looked at her best friend in shock. She couldn't believe the woman had just made such a logical statement. I'm different from you. I'm merely too lazy to think, while you think with your muscles. Fors pursed her lips, leaned her head sideways and smiled. Teasing me doesn't make you smarter. Zia tried to smooth out her few strands of blonde hair that was sticking out. All right, let's head over to Empress Burrow and tell Miss Audrey about this. Fors nodded faintly and said, so, what's our emergency contact method with Miss Audrey? Zia was momentarily put at a loss. She looked afar at the tombstone as she said, she told me that pet dog of hers we saw earlier walks herself at least 5 times a day. Well, the next walk should be after lunch. In other words, we have to loiter around suspiciously outside Count Hall's luxurious manor. The corner of Fors' lips twitched. Zio suddenly looked sideways and revealed an obsequious smile. Fors, or would you prefer to just sneak in? Don't think that would be difficult for you. It's what you're good at. A hereditary count for centuries, one of the most influential parliament members in the House of Lords, the largest shareholder of Varvet Bank, the 4th largest shareholder of Backland Bank, the special consultant of the Royal Bank of Loan, the 3rd largest shareholder of Suchet Bank in the Intis Republic, the 2nd largest shareholder of Constant Coal and Steel Consortium, and so on. These are the titles of Miss Audrey's father. Zio, use your brain. How could a man like that not employ any Beyonders? Would he not have any prized collections? This is different from those destitute viscounts and barons. Fors replied in exasperation. I swear in the name of God, if I were to sneak in, I would be discovered and caught within 5 minutes. Zio nodded continuously in agreement. Let's wait for the golden retriever then. With that said, she led the way. After she took a few steps forward, she spoke with her back facing Fours. Well, I will compensate you for your losses and the damages in the future. I'm referring to the stone, of course. Listening to that, the corner of Fours' lips lifted and she said, I was saving myself. And Zio, you're going the wrong way. God, if you were an apprentice and ended up becoming a traveler in the future, it would be a disaster. Outside Count Hall's luxurious manor, Zio and Fours hid behind an Inti's parasol tree and secretly observed their target building in silence, watching the people walking to and fro. After God knows how long, they finally saw the golden retriever come out from a hidden hole under the wall. It pricked up its ears and looked to its left and right, appearing very cautious. Just as Susie started taking its walk happily, a black male dog popped up from nowhere. It fawned on Susie and started running around in circles. This is the first time I'm seeing a dog show such a human-like reaction. Just how much does it hate that black dog? Zio sighed. He could tell from Susie's gaze and facial expression that there was obvious detest. Forrest smiled and said, it's just like encountering a rash, disgusting, and persistent lecher. Seeing Susie attempt to speed up to escape the black dog's pursuit, Zio stood up to administer justice. My ruling is for you to leave her alone. Zio shouted with a mask of solemnity. The black dog was taken aback and immediately scampered away with its tail between its legs. Susie let out a breath of relief and slowed down. It barked politely and wagged its tail. That was close. I nearly said thank you to them, the golden retriever thought in joy. That would have been a very awkward situation. A melodic tune slowly came to a halt as Audrey picked up the latest intelligence Zio and Fours had delivered and read it with knitted brows. She closed the piano cover and stood up elegantly. She paced back and forth in her piano room and considered her next course of action. Kalangos is a very dangerous man. If Zio and Fours continued investigating, they might end up in danger. It might even expose me. Yes, I should just proceed according to their suggestion. Oh yeah, it's another 2 hours until the Tarot Club. I wonder what Mr. Fool would suggest. If he's still not interested, I'll discuss it with the hanged man carefully. Audrey gradually calmed herself down. This was the first time she had encountered, or perhaps was described as being placed in such a perilous situation. There was already one death. 3 in the afternoon. Audrey's vision recovered from a crimson and blurry state before seeing the boundless gray fog that didn't belong to reality, the lofty palace that looked like the home of a giant, the long ancient mottled bronze table, and the fool who was always engulfed by a thick layer of fog. Lastly, she saw the hanged man and the sun. At that moment, Audrey's tense and anxious emotions seemed to relax. She felt so safe, so calm. I'm participating in the tarot club that doesn't belong in the material world, and I'm dealing with Mr. Fool, who's nearly a god. Kalangos and I are on different levels. Audrey sat in an upright position proudly. She lifted her chin slightly and greeted cheerfully, Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Good afternoon, Mr. Hanged Man. Good afternoon, Mr. Sun. After they greeted one another, Klein saw that Miss Justice was indicating her desire to speak. Therefore, he nodded faintly to express his permission. Honorable Mr. Fool, I wonder if your adorer has received the compensation of £300. Audrey asked, holding back her urge to talk about Kalangos while she showed concern over her leader's adorer. Klein smiled and said, I didn't pay close attention to this matter. But as my adorer didn't request for additional help, I suppose he has already received. Yes, V checked multiple times. There are £300 lying in my anonymous bank account, Klein added in his head happily. That's great. Audrey relaxed and looked across her. Mr. Hanged Man, there's been progress regarding Kalangos. Alger suddenly sat up straight. He couldn't hide his excitement as he asked, Where is he? Unfortunately, he noticed our investigations just after we discovered his tracks. He killed one of the personnel involved. Audrey repeated the highlights of Zio's and Four's story and explained their follow-up plan in detail. Alger nodded faintly and said, I'll pay close attention. Then he turned to the side and looked towards the seat of honor at the long bronze table. Under the vacant gaze of the son, Derek, who listened but didn't understand anything, he said, Honorable Mr. Fool, if I were to find out Kalangos' true intention and the very important and magical item that he intends to obtain, please allow me to recite your name and inform you through the ritual. He didn't repeat his request for the fool's adorer to provide him assistance. As he brought it up before and the fool had given his answer, there was no need to harp on the topic. Otherwise, it might provoke the god. Hence, Alger made it clear that his intention was only to report his finding. If the final temptation was sufficient, he believed that Mr. Fool's adorer would definitely appear. That works. Audrey widened her eyes. I should have asked for the right to report as well. I might be able to gain Mr. Fool's guidance occasionally, she thought with regret. Under everyone's gaze, Klein leaned back into his chair and nodded faintly. He replied slowly, you may. Alger heaved a sigh of relief when he heard the fool's answer. He lowered his head and humbly said, please allow me to thank you in advance. That's because I'm also curious about the item Kalangos is searching for. I want to know about the item that can allow a Sequence 6 Wind Blessed to have the strength of a Sequence 4. I'm also curious about what a pirate admiral is going to do in Backland. Klein smiled, maintaining his profound posture. It's not like I've promised to provide assistance after I hear your prayer. He emphasized in his heart. But now he was a lot more confident than before. Now he had actual allies and the mysterious Mr. Azek, who was currently in Backland. If it was absolutely necessary, Klein was willing to use the bronze whistle to enlist the help of Azek. Of course, he definitely wouldn't mention the Tarot Club. He would probably say he got information from some random source. There were still two problems that existed in this matter. First, Klein was only limited to a cooperative relationship with Azek. It wasn't necessarily the case that Azek would provide assistance unless he was interested in what Kalangos was doing or the mystical item that he was after. Second, Klein was unsure of just how powerful Azek was. Even if he had made the assumption that Azek was a high-sequence Beyonder, he had to consider the fact that his memory loss might have weakened his ability. After all, knowledge was usually equated with power, and the lack of knowledge would definitely diminish Azek's power. If that was the case, Klein couldn't guarantee that Azek could deal with Kalangos, especially with the latter wielding the creeping hunger. Klein was afraid that he would be placing Azek in danger, so he was unwilling to trouble Azek, unless he absolutely had to. Now that I think about it, Mr. Azek's terrifying messenger can be summoned with the bronze whistle. No, that thing doesn't look like a messenger at all. It could take the role of an evil boss. So even if Mr. Azek cannot beat the creeping hunger-augmented Kalangos, he should be able to defend himself easily and have enough power left to save the hanged man, Miss Justice, and her partners. Klein shifted his posture as he thought, still leaning against the back of his chair. He propped his right leg over his left. The hanged man Alger looked at the fool and spoke once again. Team about to receive a batch of pages from Emperor Rosel's diary. I believe that I can present them to you in the next gathering, or the gathering after that. According to the arrangement of the Church of the Lord of Storms, Pritz Harbor was under the jurisdiction of the Backland Diocese. Thus, Alger could enter the capital and wait for Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos to show himself under the guise of reporting about his previous voyage. Backland had been the headquarters of the Church of the Lord of Storms until the end of the last epoch, having shifted their holy altar to Pasu Island only after the establishment of the Lone Kingdom. Regardless, the status of the Church of the Lord of Storms in Backland was second only to the headquarters of the 7 great churches. One could imagine the information the Church of the Lord of Storms held. Under these circumstances, Alger was confident that he would be able to collect pages of Emperor Rosel's diary in the name of research. After all, they were indecipherable at present. Klein allowed joy to color his tone as he said with a gentle nod, very good. What he was really feeling right now was a mix of joy and worry. He was happy that he could see several pages of Emperor Rosel's diary soon. They might contain a lot of useful information, but he was also worried about what he had to give the hanged man in return. After all, no one knew if the hanged man would be interested in the contents of the diary, or if the content was valuable enough. Even a seer is unable to determine that in advance. Must I really let my adorer help? Klein gave a silent sigh. Audrey Hall hurriedly spoke up, and she saw the conversation between the hanged man and the fool end. Honorable Mr. Fool, may I recite your name and inform you using a ritual should I receive any timely and useful information? Timely look, Miss Justice's choice of words is so refined. Compared to her, you're too vulgar, the hanged man. Klein nodded slightly, saying past the fog you may. Great. Audrey secretly clenched her fists. At the same time, Klein turned to look at the son, Derek Berg, who had been silently listening to their conversation. He spoke, his tone was peaceful. The same goes for you as well. Yes, Mr. Fool. Derek lowered his head. The majestic palace was silent for a few seconds before Audrey spoke. Tea need the complete pituitary gland of a rainbow salamander, one of the main ingredients of the telepathist potion. Hangman Alger nodded slightly as if he was contemplating. Tea don't have it. To be honest, I've only seen this creature in textbooks. The son, Derek, heard the term automatically translated to him as phantom netherdrake. What kind of textbook would discuss a supernatural creature? How envious. I can only get information like that at a Beyonder gathering, through word of mouth, or through a crumpled piece of paper. There's no system in place, and my search for knowledge lacks organization. I'll find a way to trade for the son's textbook in the future. Oh, he was interested in the formula for the Bard potion, Audrey thought, a little envious. At that moment Alger looked at the fool, then retracted his gaze. He then looked opposite him and said in thought, I might have a way of obtaining the complete pituitary gland of the rainbow salamander. Without waiting for Audrey to speak, he added on, but it's under the premise that Kalangos is found. When the time comes, the complete pituitary gland of the rainbow salamander would be equivalent to the extra compensation that I owe you. Miss Justice, you might not know, but these creatures are nearly extinct, and we can only find traces of them in primitive islands in the Sea of Fog, the Berserk Sea, or the Sanya Sea. Not many people have the coordinates to these islands. Heth, if you're interested, we can make a deal, for I am one of the few who knows how to get there. I'm also interested in those primitive islands. Klein silently listened to their conversation. Thinking about the extinction of the rainbow salamander, he suddenly recalled the joke he cracked with old Neil, the Dragons and Giants Protection Association. He let out a sigh in his heart. Audrey became thrilled after hearing that. She fought back her emotions as she said, I once dreamed of going on a voyage in search of these primitive islands to take in the history. My goddess, the Tarot Club is too powerful, too wonderful. To be able to recruit a member who has the coordinates of the primitive islands. Praise Mr. Fool. Audrey couldn't maintain her spectator state as a smile crept across her face. Primitive islands. Klein froze for a moment, then thought about a page of Emperor Rosel's diary that he had seen, the one where the emperor described himself as a pirate king. He said that he discovered an unnamed island with many supernatural creatures when he and his 4 horsemen of the apocalypse were traversing the Sea of Fog on an unsafe sea route. Could that be the so-called primitive island? How unfortunate. The great emperor didn't include any coordinates in his diary. Perhaps the information will be in some future pages. But as of now, I haven't received any pages of his diary in chronological order. Klein was filled with regret and anticipation. The son Derek was already confused by the terms Sea of Fog, Berserk Sea, Sanya Sea, Primitive Island, etc. He felt more and more certain that Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man belonged to a different world than he did. After collecting herself for a few seconds, Audrey asked curiously, does the near extinction of the rainbow salamander mean that the spectator pathway will be severed soon? No, there will definitely be substitute material. Alger gave a definite answer. What substitute materials are there? Audrey's eyes brightened as she asked. Alger shook his head, replying without revealing certain profound truths, I don't know. Perhaps the members of the psychology alchemists might know. Then how can you be so sure that there will be substitute ingredients? Audrey didn't understand. Alger laughed and said, you will understand in time. Or do you have something to trade for the information right now? Guess LL wait. Audrey pouted and sighed. She also dismissed the idea of asking Mr. Fool. There's no use in me knowing for the time being. The Hanged Man will definitely ask about something regarding Rear Admiral Hurricane, and I cannot be dragged too deep into that matter. She suddenly felt like praising her intellect. But what she never expected was that Mr. Fool was feeling very disappointed at that moment. Klein was rather curious about the secrets which Alger's words held. Unfortunately, Miss Justice, who was the best assist all this while, didn't choose to go through with the transaction. No matter what method they chose to perform a transaction, the contents of the deal couldn't be hidden from the owner of the fog. Well, even if the rainbow salamander is nearing extinction, the psychology alchemists are still giving out formulas listing it as an ingredient instead of providing a substitute. Does this mean that the psychology alchemists are in possession of the coordinates of certain primitive islands? Or could they be working together with an organization that has the coordinates? Klein wondered. After the end of the transaction discussions, Klein looked around, then turned to the sun. He asked in a gentle tone, "Does the City of Silver still believe in God?" Klein was merely an official member of the Nighthawks and had no access to deeper mysticism knowledge. An example would be sacrificial ritual. Thus, in order to refine his understanding of performing sacrificing dedicated to himself, to move materials in the mysterious space above the gray fog, as a sequence 8, Klein needed to learn it as soon as possible from other sources. He came up with 3 methods after continuous consideration. First, he was going to ask spirit guide Dolly, who was adept at ritualistic magic whilst also being a deacon. But this might invite suspicion from her. Thus, Klein could only patiently wait for an opportunity. Second, he could ask Mr. Azek, but Klein couldn't guarantee that he would be able to recall the knowledge in this area. Third, he was going to use a roundabout way to ask Sun, who lived in the City of Silver. Klein already had an idea of how he was going to do it, while effectively maintaining his image. Whatever he asked would be tied to the gods. Derek replied in a respectful tone, "We still believe in the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God." Always overthinks upon hearing the fool's question, Audrey perked up her ears and entered her spectator state. She waited for the sun to answer. She had always been curious about where the City of Silver was and what was so special about that place, but she couldn't bring herself to ask. It touched upon his privacy after all. At that moment, Mr. Fool was asking personally. It was like finishing the first volume of an outstanding detective novel she had been reading for a long time, and she finally had the chance to buy the next volume. The Sun's answer didn't disappoint her. They didn't believe in the mainstream 7 Orthodox deities, nor did they believe in death as the southern continent did. They also didn't believe in the hidden existences, evil gods or devils, primordial demoness, hidden sage, dark side of the universe, chained god, or the true creator, which the hanged man had told her before. The City of Silver is really special. They actually worship the creator himself. This is the primordial worship that Mr. Hanged Man described right. The description of omnipotence is a little strange. Audrey stole a glance at the hanged man subconsciously and realized that he was nodding slightly. Klein wasn't surprised at all. He purposely chuckled and asked in reply, "Even though he abandoned you?" Abandoned? The creator abandoned the City of Silver. Alger was shocked. When he made the connection regarding a particular term. The forsaken land of the gods. In the confidential information of the Church of the Lord of Storms, at the security clearance level that Alger, who was captain, equivalent to the bishop level, could access, the forsaken land of the gods had always only been a name with no actual description. However, it clearly pointed towards the end of the Sanya Sea. From what he knew, even the cardinals at the core of the church had no idea what the forsaken land of the gods represented. But only the leader of the church, the proxy of the Lord of Storms, knew something about the situation and seemed to be taking charge of the hidden mission to look for the forsaken land of the god. Alger had once made a bold guess when he equated the true creator's holy residence, which was promoted by the Aurora Order, with the forsaken land of the god. But unfortunately, the fool hadn't confirmed his guess, so he couldn't be sure. Now, he was shocked and surprised to find that the Tarot Club member using the sun as his code name was very likely from the forsaken land of the god. Mr. Fool knew where the forsaken land of the gods was all this time, and he could pull someone from there to be a member of the gathering. This is a hidden place that the Church of the Lord of Storms has been trying to find to no avail. Alger looked at the fool who was seated in the seat of honor at the end of the ancient long bronze table in horror. He could only see that he was leaning back in his chair in silence, engulfed by the thick fog. Audrey wasn't particularly moved about it. The only time that she had heard about the forsaken land of the gods was from the hanged man's question. She wasn't particularly interested, so she failed to associate it to anything from what Mr. Fool said earlier. The City of Silver has the legend about being abandoned by the creator. Huh, Mr. Hanged Man seems to be deeply affected. What is he amazed and afraid of? Audrey nodded in puzzlement as she remembered the details of the moment. Yes, we believe that we will regain the Lord's favor in the end. Perhaps it will be on the day the sun rises again, Derek Berg answered in an uncertain tone. We were once ruled by the giant's royal family, and we worshipped the giant King Almi. Later, we were saved by the Lord, and we will never betray the Lord again. Ruled by the giant's royal family, it really is ancient. But it doesn't seem to match. Alger, who had guessed at something, suddenly recalled the description about the second epic in the hidden chapter of the Book of Storm. The second epic was also known as humanity's dark epic. At the time, the sky, ocean, and land were ruled over by dragons, giants, elves, mutants, devils, phoenixes, demonic wolves, and dead spirits. But in the end, the Lord of Storms, eternal blazing sun, and the God of knowledge and wisdom led humanity into defeating the supernatural creatures and ushered in the beginning of the third epoch, the glorious era, which was later known as Cataclysm. Giant King Almir, Klein repeated the name in silence. In various legends and myths, it was a great existence on par with the deity. Even now, there were still some places that worshipped him. Even the most famous and most expensive grape wine in the Intis Republic was named after Almir. It was said that the giant king particularly fancied grape wine, which was like blood. Considering the fact that the Church of the God of Combat is in control of the complete pathway of the warrior, which once belonged to the giants, can I assume that Almir was the ancient god of combat? Klein guessed. He nodded deliberately, but didn't think any further about it. He then asked calmly, "Do you still offer sacrifices to this omnipotent god?" "Yes, we still do. But since the day we were abandoned, we have never gotten any response." Derek's voice had a hint of unconcealed pain. Klein leaned against the back of his chair leisurely. He half closed his eyes and said, "Describe the process of your offering ritual in detail. Does Mr. Fool want to figure out the truth behind the City of Silver's abandonment? Or does he want to determine if the Creator still exists?" Alger suddenly felt a shock through his body, and he quivered. Not only was he afraid, but he was also excited too. This was because he felt he was being made privy to the secrets between deities. That made him feel like he had been elevated to a whole new level. "I've been chasing after power, after strength. Didn't I do it to achieve this kind of feeling?" Alger leaned back, lifted his chin, and got carried away with his thoughts. "Mr. Hanged Man's mental state doesn't seem to be normal." Audrey looked at him with pity. She finally understood that there might be some sort of shocking secret behind the communication between Mr. Fool and the Sun, which led to the Hanged Man's loss of composure. After the Kalango's commission is over, he'll pay the price to get information about what Mr. Hanged Man learned today. I wonder if he would be willing to, Audrey thought in anticipation, yet was still a little worried. Derek didn't notice the weight that was hanging on his answer as he replied frankly, "We build opulent altars covered in the Lord's symbol. Every time we receive a bumper black-faced grass harvest, we hold a sacrificial ritual. We use the monsters we capture in the depths of the darkness to use as sacrificial offering. After we recite God's honorable title and the necessary prayers, we dance for him and then kill the monsters, to let their spirituality and tainted blood dye the entire altar. If we haven't caught any monsters, then we use a sinner on the lowest floor in the City of Silver prison instead. Then we turn the very first batch of black-faced grass into food and serve it before the Lord. In the end, we sing praises in unison and end the ritual. Since I was planning to offer a sacrifice to myself, I'm not picky about time, and the altar can be as simple as possible. The most important part would be to open a channel with the aid of the monster's spirituality, or the blood-containing Beyonder powers, to complete the sacrifice offering. Of course, this is under the premise that one will receive a response." How extravagant! Klein used his mysticism knowledge to analyze every step of the sacrificial ritual in the City of Silver before finally saying, "What are the corresponding prayers? What language do you recite them in?" Derek was also looking forward to this, so as to gain hints from Mr. Fool on how to shake off the curse, so he recalled it carefully and answered, "We use Jotun, which is also our common language. The corresponding prayers are, your devoted believers pray for your attention. We pray for you to take their offerings. We pray for you to open the gates to your kingdom." Klein listened in silence and intentionally let the engulfing fog slowly swirl around him. He nodded as though deep in thought and remained silent. As for what he learned from it, he obviously wouldn't share it. Alger found it very normal. How could the secrets of a deity be revealed directly to a mortal? Derek also steeled his resolve to quickly grow in power, so that he could obtain something that could garner Mr. Fool's interest in exchange for his guidance. After some more communication, Klein ended the gathering. He watched Justice's, the Hanged Man's, and the Sun's figures vanish before him. He looked down and saw the boundless gray fog and crimson stars, that seemed eternally immutable. However, after he advanced to sequence 8, he realized that he could connect even more stars. In other words, he could pull in more members. At least 2, Klein nodded indiscernibly. He wasn't in a hurry to add new members. He planned to act as he had before. He would first wait and observe. If Justice and the Hanged Man had any recommendations, he could assess them first. What I saw the last few times was when the sun was praying. There was a clear crystal ball before him, but ever since I pulled him into the world above the gray fog, that crystal ball has never appeared again. Does the prerequisite needed to pull people in through the connection of the Crimson Star have something to do with having a special item around? Or does every Crimson Star correspond to an item in reality, which, when it's connected successfully, it would return to the world above the gray fog? I wonder if Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man were the same. Let's just assume that's the case. In that case, if people without this special item were to recite, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck," and allow me to hear their prayers, would I be able to pull them in? I can give it a try in the future. Klein didn't stay any longer. He wrapped himself with spirituality and stimulated a descent, leaving behind the lofty palace, the ancient table, and the 22 high-backed chairs which sat immutably above the gray fog. He had mastered the overflowing power of the clown potion and eliminated the corresponding negative effects. Therefore, he wanted to try the ritual to summon himself. I wonder what I'll conjure this time, Klein thought in anticipation and fear as he fell through the mad ravings. Klein didn't hurry to dispel the wall of spirituality when he returned to his room. Instead, he expertly took out a candle infused with sandalwood and placed it in the middle of his desk. He then followed the steps for the ritual, lighting up the candle with his spirituality and scattering essences, extract, and herb powder herbs symbolizing good luck and mystery. He saw the flame alternate between being dull and bright as he took in the fragrance of peace and harmony. Klein took 2 steps back and looked at the candle on the table. He then shouted in the language of the giants, "I." After a pause, he switched to Hermes. "I summon in my name, the fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck." At that moment, the flickering flame fused itself with the harmonious scent to form an illusory vortex, a vortex that manically absorbed the spirituality. After Klein finished reciting the incantations, the vortex stabilized to become a palm-sized circle of grayish-white fog. After observing the fog, Klein took 4 steps counterclockwise without hesitation. He returned to the world above the fog, and as he expected, he saw ripples of light spreading from his high-backed chair, accentuating the mysterious aura of the weird symbol, the pupil-less eye and partially contorted lines, on his chair. He took in a deep breath and calmed his soul down using cogitation before extending his hand toward the target. At that moment, he heard the incantations that he had just recited. He saw the surging spirituality, and the rippling light fused to form an illusory door. Compared to the previous time, the door was now completely formed and was etched full of mysterious patterns. The patterns were the same as the symbol on the back of the fool's chair, a symbol made up of the pupil-less eye and the partially contorted line. As he looked at the door, Klein focused his mind and willed the door open. Without warning, ripples formed in the eternally immutable grayish-white fog and the majestic palace, like a stone being cast in a peaceful pond. The ripples spread in the direction of the door of summoning. The sound of heavy scraping sound caused by friction could suddenly be heard. A slit appeared in the heavy, mysterious door. Beyond it, one could faintly see an immensely dark world, filled with countless indescribable, transparent figures. There were also streaks of different colors, lustrous splendor that harbored infinite knowledge. At that moment, Klein felt an unimaginable, irresistible attractive force coming from beyond the door. He couldn't help but get pulled towards it. "Damn, are you not giving me the choice?" Just as he had that alarming thought, his body went through the slit and vanished into the darkness behind the door. The dizzying, maniacal roars gradually died down. Klein finally came to his senses. He saw a young man in front of him. The man was wearing an old shirt, had black hair, brown eyes, and average-looking facial features. The man had an average build, was a little skinny, but his frame seemed to hide considerable power. He also had the obvious demeanor of a scholar. "Isn't that me?" Klein wasn't a stranger to scenes like this. He encountered something like this every time he looked in the mirror. He nodded indiscernibly and surveyed his surroundings. He saw his bed with a white bedsheet draped over it. He saw his half-top hat, tuxedo, and black windbreaker hanging on his clothes rack. He saw a bookshelf with quite a number of books, his neat table that only had one candle on it. He saw the candle flame emitting a grayish-white glow. And now he was floating in front of the palm-sized circle of grayish-white fog. So have I really summoned myself? It feels a little like an out-of-body experience, but there's also something a little different. Klein looked at the physical body belonging to him, toward his blank, vacant eyes, and slipped into deep thought. But he could finally confirm one thing. It was only his soul, also known as his spirit body in mysticism, that headed to the world of fog. The exterior appearance was that of the astral projection. It's no wonder that I can directly see the astral projection surface of Justice, the Hanged Man, and the Sun, and confirm whether they were Beyonders or not when I was in the world above the fog. I could also guess their sequence numbers. My physical body seems to be under some form of protection, perhaps from the power of the ritual, for me to stand with such stability and not lose my balance. It should be the same for Miss Justice and the others. Klein slowly got used to the current situation and started to analyze the conditions of both his physical body and soul. He retracted his gaze and tried to move his soul, now fused with powers from the mysterious space. Whoosh! A cold wind started to blow as it spiraled around the room. Klein savored the sensation of flying, joyfully making circles in the room. I can also take on the role of a messenger in this city now. I wonder if I can carry physical items with me. He collected himself and stopped. He floated in the air and experimented with his other abilities. He tried to grab a notebook from his bookshelf, but his hand passed through it. It feels a little sticky. It's not like moving through air. I might be able to grab it after I become more powerful and able to better utilize the mysterious powers of the world above the gray fog. Klein once again tried grabbing a single piece of paper, but to no avail. After more than 10 seconds of deliberation, he flew toward the clothes rack and extended his transparent hand into the pocket of his black windbreaker. He touched the slumber charms and the requiem charms that he replenished from a successful claim. They were objects infused with his own spirituality, different from ordinary objects in supernatural terms. Thus, Klein wanted to see if he could carry them about. His palm once again went through the charms, but he could clearly feel their existence. He felt the intertwining of spirituality, but he didn't have enough strength to pick them up. Of course, another explanation was that there wasn't enough spirituality within the charms to achieve a strong resonance with his current state. The spirituality isn't strong enough, Klein thought as he moved towards the other pocket. That pocket stored the flaring sun charms that he made with the stolen power of the divine blood and his own spirituality. A warm sensation quickly spread all over his body, making his form turn more stable and his thoughts clearer. He could take the thin gold piece out of his pocket. In the mirror in his room, the charm seemed to float out of the pocket on its own accord, similar to the descriptions in Ghost Story. I can move flaring sun charm. I can also create sound using my spirituality, so I do have certain abilities in this state. Klein flew toward the mirror and stopped in front of it. He saw that only the thin gold piece was reflected. Other than that, it was only the furniture and darkness in the room caused by the drawn curtain. After a few seconds of consideration, he placed the flaring sun charm onto the bed before returning to the front of the mirror. He wanted to see if he could move through the mirror. His vision turned dark. Klein's vantage point suddenly changed. He saw the room that was reflected in the mirror, the furniture that was accentuated by the weak sources of light. It made him feel as though he was hiding in an obscure corner, peeping into a tiny portion of the room. I really can go through the mirror. But this is only an ordinary item which doesn't lead to some mysterious and strange world. Klein nodded and charged forward, once again returning to his room. The success of carrying the flaring sun charm gave him immense confidence. Hence, he attempted grabbing something else. Mr. Azek's copper whistle. The moment he touched the ancient and intricate object, he felt his spirituality expanding and freezing. His illusory eyes turned into dark, burning flame. It feels like I have gotten a little more powerful. My form is like a wraith's, but without the strong sense of vengeance. Klein projected his current appearance by calming his mind. This was one of the abilities of a clown. Mr. Azek's copper whistle is truly fascinating. He nodded, noticing that he could now pick up pieces of paper with certain weights. He could also pick up his slumber charm. How unfortunate. I can carry the silver ritual dagger, but the revolver is too heavy. Klein concluded his experiments and turned to see if he could use any spells in this state. After serious tests, he concluded that he could conjure two spells, the first being a formless howl could shake the souls of his target, and the second was inducing a state akin to freezing via contact with a target. Klein came to a satisfied stop. He looked out the oriel window, towards the sunlight and street covered by the curtain. I wonder if I can move about during the day in this state, he muttered as he floated towards the window. He then carefully lifted the curtain, creating a slit and allowing a small amount of sunlight to pass through the wall of spirituality and into the room. Under the radiant sunlight, Klein felt his soul boil with a black fog. His powers were also being drained away, bit by bit. He quickly released his grip, allowing the curtain to block the light. I can't, Klein thought for a moment, then placed his gaze on the flaring sun charm on the bed. I wonder if the effect would be the same if I'm augmented with the divine blood of the eternal blazing sun. He floated toward the bed and tried to grab the thin piece of gold. But just as he touched the charm, the warm, pure feeling formed a stark contrast with his burgeoning cold spirituality. It was like an existential conflict between fire and water. Sizzle! He tossed the piece of gold away as if he had been burned. The power of Mr. Azek's copper whistle cannot inhabit my soul at the same time as the flaring sun charm. Klein understood as he set the copper whistle down. He felt his spirituality shrink, and the black flames in his eyes extinguished. In this state, both the spells I can use have been weakened. After another round of experimentation, Klein grabbed the flaring sun charm, once again feeling the stabilizing and warm purifying effects the charm had on his spirit body. He returned to the window and cautiously moved through the curtain. The sunlight only felt warm on his body, but it didn't inflict any harm. Not bad, Klein let out a mixed smile. He made his way past the wall of spirituality and cautiously flew out of the house with the intention of conducting more experiments. The weather in Tianjin turned from refreshing cool to bitingly chill in early September. However, the sunlight at 3 or 4 in the afternoon was still warm and soothing. Klein went through the wall of spirituality and the oriel window. He floated in the air outside of his bedroom as he overlooked the people and carriages shuttling to and fro Daffodil Street. Just then, there was a man in a gray labor uniform who suddenly lifted his head and looked over. Klein panicked and wanted to hide, but he couldn't find any suitable cover. When he didn't see anything to hide behind, he started to sneak back into his house. However, from the corner of his eye, he saw the man earlier merely glanced over the window. Then his gaze followed a flying sparrow, but unfortunately he lost sight of it. In Tianjin, birds could occasionally be seen. Phew, I forgot that an ordinary person wouldn't be able to see me. Klein let out a breath of relief and felt that he had yet to get used to the situation. As he grew more confident, he flew lower and went to a nearby spacious street where he floated above people's heads. As he drew closer, Klein immediately realized that his vision was the same as his spirit vision. There was no need for him to activate it, but there was a restriction to its range. Also, besides the aura and emotional colors, he could faintly feel the existence of everyone's soul. They were blurry, illusory, and transparent. In this state, I think I could bypass a person's body and directly attack their soul. Klein nodded thoughtfully. He circled around and prepared to test his fastest speed. Hence, he flew towards Iron Cross Street with all his strength. It didn't take long before he came to a halt and arrived outside the apartment he used to stay in. It should be about the speed of a car on the highway. It's a pity that I still can't go in and out of the spirit world, otherwise, it'd be perfect. But if I were to be lost in the spirit world, it's said that the consequences are very severe. Just as Klein finished his self-evaluation, he felt low-spirited and gloomy. There was an unspoken pressure. He looked around and felt that Iron Cross Street was engulfed with gloominess that ordinary people could see, a darkness that the sunlight couldn't dispel. There were layers of numbness, despair, pain, and other emotions overlapping, as though they were corporeal. It feels just like what I experienced when using spiritual perception on this street when I first became a seer. Iron Cross Street's middle street and lower street hasn't changed to this day. I wonder how many years it took to accumulate such oppression and gloominess. Klein recalled the past and sighed as he flew up to the 3rd floor of the surrounding building. He finally felt sunlight and shook off his depression. Klein flew along Lower Street, and from time to time, he would see residents who were dressed in tattered clothes, looking expressionless and malnourished. He even ran into two bodies that had died of natural causes, prolonged starvation and malnutrition with a sudden infliction of an illness. There were countless people who died in agony every month. However, the bankrupt farmers and slaves that surged in from the southern continent replaced them very quickly. Klein sighed in silence and changed direction and flew south. That was the industrial area of Tianjin. The steelworks, lead factories, ceramic factories, printing factories, metalworks factories, machine construction factories, and other factories all built right next to one another. As he flew, Klein saw towering chimneys. He saw dust filling the air and a thick gloominess that was only slightly better than that of Lower Street. It was crowded with emotions of exhaustion, pain, pessimism, and numbness. Laborers who were in their 30s were considered the minority. Just as Klein wanted to fly lower to look at the area more closely, he suddenly felt weak. It was a weakness that came from inside him. My spirituality can't withstand the duress. Klein became alarmed. He was in a hurry to return home, but he suddenly thought of a better possibility. I was summoned out. If I were to end the summon, I would return naturally. He calmed down and carefully felt the surrounding environment and his status. Unsurprisingly, he discovered something that was connected to him from infinitely far away, but also infinitely close to him. It formed an intricate tether to him. Through this connection, Klein clenched the flaring sun charm tightly and willed the strong desire to end the summon. A massive and terrifying suction force overwhelmed him as his figure went from transparent to nearly invisible, and in a flash, he vanished from the corporeal world. Silence was everywhere in the boundless gray fog, and there were illusory crimson stars that twinkled. Klein reappeared in the lofty palace that looked like the home of a giant, as he sat in the seat of honor at the ancient bronze table. The entire procedure went well. Furthermore, Klein looked at his spirit body in pleasant surprise and saw that it contained a warm and pure gold portion. The flaring sun charm. I actually brought something corporeal into the world above the gray fog. He held the charm with a smile and fiddled with it to make sure it wasn't an illusory item. Klein stood up and paced back and forth, feeling completely gratified. He thought to himself in anticipation. As expected, ingredients and items can be brought into this mysterious space. I just need to find the correct way. However, this method is quite complicated. It needs me to do quite a bit before it reaches the destination. Furthermore, if I were to be summoned by the members all the time, it would damage the fool's image. I can only do that occasionally, or after I understand it more. I can design an incantation that summons the fool's adorer, but it will similarly be directed at me. I'm not some born laborer. Why must the incantation point towards me? When the time comes, I can conjure what seems like a messenger or a more unique adorer, and let it deal with the dispatch and collection of materials. Ideas popped up one after another as Klein contemplated. But due to the limitation of his capabilities and knowledge, he couldn't put them into practice just yet. As he became even weaker, Klein didn't dare to stay any longer. He used his spirituality to envelop himself and simulate the feeling of descending. In the blink of an eye, he returned to his bedroom. He saw splendid sunlight pouring in through the gap in his curtain. He examined his body and made sure that the flaring sun charm wasn't brought back but left above the gray fog. When I've gotten enough rest, I'll repeat the summoning ritual at dawn to bring the flaring sun charm back to reality. Sigh, it would be great if I could maintain the state a little longer. That way, I would be able to investigate the houses with red chimney. It's such a pity that I can't do it yet. I could only fly long enough to investigate a few houses before having to return above the gray fog and rest for half a day. The efficiency would be just as low. Klein walked before his desk and put out the silent burning candle. After he packed his things, he didn't remove the wall of spirituality immediately. Instead, he sat down and took out a pen and paper to write a letter to Mr. Azek. After he wrote the salutation of "Dear Sir," he pondered for a few minutes before penning. El recently received news that one of the 7 pirate admirals, Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos, has infiltrated Backland. He carries a mystical item called the Creeping Hunger. It provides an ability similar to a shepherd, which is a sequence 5 Beyonder that swallows different souls and obtains their corresponding power. It's said that there is a limit to the number of souls that one can let out to graze, but the souls can be swapped on. Kalangos seems to have many Beyonder powers, and I'm not sure what he's trying to do in Backland. The news I received suggested that he might be after a very important, very mystical item that could make Kalangos a high-sequence beyonder or as powerful as a high-sequence beyonder. Klein fabricated his source of information to generally describe the situation with Kalangos, but it wasn't like Mr. Azek would look for a Nighthawk captain to confirm it. Klein didn't directly request assistance, but made it seem like he brought up the subject casually to encourage Azek to be careful. Regardless of whether Mr. Azek was willing to help, it wouldn't hurt to first lay the foundation. If Klein eventually needed to ask for help, it wouldn't appear out of the blue that way. Klein let out a breath slowly and started writing the main content of the letter. The mastermind behind all that has happened hasn't taken any further action, and I still haven't found any related clues. The reason why I'm contacting you so suddenly is mainly to ask for your guidance regarding sacrificial ritual. I came across something like that during a recent mission. With the son's description and Mr. Azek's answer to compare, I should be able to try a sacrificial ritual after that. By reversing the ritual, I should be able to bestow items. This would be a more suitable ritual for exchanging ingredients and items rather than summoning myself. Yes, let's hope that Mr. Azek remembers the knowledge about this. Klein nodded slightly. He put down his pen without signing his name. There's only one copper whistle, so I'm sure Mr. Azek wouldn't make a mistake with the sender. Therefore, to be careful, Klein didn't leave his name. After he folded the letter, he looked at his 3-meter-tall ceiling. He picked up the copper whistle from the bed, a little hesitantly. Perfect, let it squat and get the letter. Klein emphasized inwardly before lifting his right hand and putting the copper whistle to his lips. He puffed up his cheeks and blew hard. The whistle didn't produce a sound, but Klein's acute senses noticed that the surroundings had instantly turned cold. He activated his spirit vision and saw that there were blurry yet glistening white bones surging out of his study desk like a fountain as it rose in height. The white bones quickly gathered together and turned into an illusory yet huge monster. Its head tore through the wall of spirituality and reached somewhere unknown. Klein looked at the white skeleton's thighs and body, as well as its arm that hung down. Seeing its right palm open up, the corner of Klein's lips twitched as he tossed over the folded letter. The large bony palm did a sweep and caught the letter firmly. Then Klein picked up his copper whistle and blew again, without hesitation. The monster crumbled in an instant, transforming into bones that fell onto his desk before sinking in and vanishing. After doing all of that, Klein removed the wall of spirituality. In the sudden wind that stirred, he hobbled towards the clothes rack and returned the copper whistle to its original place. Then he quickly walked to his bed and planted his head into it. The moment his body touched the soft mattress, he fell into a deep sleep. Mediumship after dinner, Klein engaged in small talk before reclining on the sofa. He picked up the recently delivered Awa Evening News and started leisurely reading. Benson wore a bitter expression as he sat opposite his sister. In front of him was the dining table which had been wiped clean by Bella. On it was grammar books, classic literature, accountancy notes, and other material. In front of Melissa were her notes and stationery, including but not limited to pens, paper, rulers, compasses, etc. TT's like V been taken some 10 years back. Back then I was still a student at the church's Sunday school, Benson complained, but he continued to study with his head down. That's not too bad. This scene makes me feel the achievement of being a parent. Klein smiled and said, knowledge can change one's destiny, and diligence will result in glory. I made up the latter half of that saying. I wonder if Roselle has said that before, he lampooned in his heart. The room quickly became quiet except for the sound of pens scratching across pages or of books being flipped. Bella had finished doing the dishes and tidied up the kitchen before returning to her room on the first floor, a small room that was formerly the guest room. Klein sipped on his side black tea as he read the newspaper, occasionally engaging in small talk with his sibling. It was relaxing. Suddenly, the gas lamps in the living room and dining room turned dark at the same time, as if they had run out of fuel. Benson and Melissa looked up towards the lamps in an attempt to figure out the cause. Klein also looked towards the lamps. At this moment, he felt something touch his arm. He was the only living person in the living room, but something had touched his arm. His hair stood on end. Klein retracted his arm and turned to look over. He saw 5 thin, pale fingers growing on the tip of a tongue. Underneath them was an irregular row of sharp teeth. Klein instinctively reached for his pocket. Within them were the requiem charms and slumber charm. but he caught a glimpse of a neatly folded piece of paper in the finger's grasp. A letter, a messenger. Klein heaved a sigh of relief. At that moment, the 5 pale fingers prodded his arm again. Klein saw Melissa about to stand up and check on the gas lamp. He reached out with his left hand and grabbed the letter. Then he quickly retracted his arm and hid the letter under the stack of newspapers on the table. He then saw the fingers, tongue, and the irregular row of sharp teeth fade away and disappear from the corner of his eye. With a thought, Klein tapped his left molar and silently activated his spirit vision. He once again saw the 5 abnormally thin fingers. He saw the long red tongue adorned with sharp white teeth. He saw them retracting back into the transparent face on the ground. A second later, the face disappeared completely. The lights in the living room and dining room were restored back to normal. Strange, Melissa pouted, finding no faults with the lamps even after a serious check. Why is the lady in our house responsible for such things, while the men watch from the side? Klein shook his head and deactivated his spirit vision. When spirits were willing to be seen and had the corresponding abilities, even an ordinary person could spot them. What happened just now was an example. After discussing the problem with the gas lamps, the Morty siblings became quiet once again. Benson and Melissa once again delved into the ocean of knowledge. Klein used the newspaper as a cover and unfolded the letter with one hand. He placed the paper between the newspapers and started reading the reply from Spirit Guide Dolly. I have to emphasize again, I prefer the title of Spirit Medium. Team going to give you a positive response regarding what you asked. Yes, mediumship rituals can also be used on living beings, not just living humans. But this is troublesome and poses some level of danger. The souls left behind by the dead are pure. They have few impurities or chaotic thoughts. We can communicate with them, asking them questions and receiving answers without any barrier. Of course, you can use the method of dream divination to directly receive images from them. But that cannot be replicated with living humans. The subject still has a will and would fight against unprotected communication between souls. Klein's lips twitched when he read the letter. He confirmed that it was Dolly herself who wrote this letter. Unprotected communication, that really is the way she speaks. Klein returned to the letter after taking a quick glance at his sibling. We only have 2 methods when faced with such a situation. First, we can use our powerful spirituality and sophisticated mediumship rituals to triumph over the will of the other person, engaging in a barbaric method of communication. Second, we can use medication to make the other party relax. What I use the most are the Amantha essence and eye of the spirit medication. I'm sure that you still have a lingering impression of those. After reaching the stage of channeling the soul, you must take note that you're also in a spiritual state, unlike when you're communicating with the souls left behind by the dead. In simpler terms, your spirituality is entering the spirituality world of the other party. Take note, a professional spirit medium wouldn't lack the means of protecting themselves under such a state. But you cannot do that. You would not be able to learn or use the techniques that I know of even if I explained them to you. So you have to maintain a certain level of lucidity and rational thought. Only through this method can you fight back against the torrents of the other party's random and chaotic thoughts before arriving before his spirit and establishing communication. At this point, you'll be communicating at the level of the body of heart and mind. At this stage, you have 2 options. One is to use a technique to forcefully read the memories of the other party, but you have to be very careful, for you cannot be sure if the things you're reading are the things that you want to know. If you indiscriminately receive a large amount of memories from a person, it's very likely that your soul would collapse. Furthermore, it will cause severe damage to your target's soul, sometimes even destroying them completely. Unless you're a professional spirit medium, I do not suggest using this method. The second option is to gently communicate with the other party's body of heart and mind. No matter how you entered, whether it be through violence or medication, the target will definitely be in a groggy state. They would generally not be able to lie, just like you couldn't know, you cannot recall what happened to you. Although I know you've definitely forgotten about it. Sorry, Madam Dolly, I was very awake back then. Klein chortled inwardly as he lowered his gaze and read the rest of the letter. Such communication can allow you to obtain real answers, but they won't necessarily all be the truth. You should understand what I mean. As long as you read the news, you must have heard Emperor Rosel's famous quote. I don't remember the actual quote, but the essence of the quote is that what one says shall be the truth. the whole truth and nothing but the truth. In short, a spirit might not remember everything because a lot of memories are in one's subconscious or collectively be in the subconscious. Oh, I shouldn't mention that. Dunn calls it the evil theories of the psychology alchemist. Thus, you must be able to guide the soul and be good at designing your questions. Do you understand? The corresponding techniques include, these are all under normal circumstances. What should we pay attention to when we're trying to communicate with the soul of a beyonder who has gone insane? It's the same, maintaining your lucidity. You must not fall into a daze at all. This is because a beyonder's spirituality is very potent, and their spirit is filled with chaotic thoughts. Let me give an example. An ordinary person's consciousness is an island. The subconscious is the portion of the sea beneath the island. The collective subconscious is the surrounding sea. The sky belongs to the spirit world. As for a beyonder, his island might have a controllable active volcano. A lunatic's island might have a volcano that can erupt at any time. It would quake the foundations and pollute the sea. When you come into unprotected contact with the spirit of an insane person, his chaotic thoughts might infect you, just like how polluted water in the sea would flow outward, spreading further. Yes, channeling his spirit under such conditions is like linking your sea to his, thus, you need to pay close attention to this pollution. A few examples are when a spirit medium is careless when doing similar things and didn't use any protection. After that, they can develop mental problems similar to that of the target. Under normal circumstances, mental diseases are not contagious. But in the domain of mysticism, in the world of channeling spirits, they can indeed be contagious. Maintaining your lucidity and not being affected by the chaotic thoughts of the target are things that you must pay attention to. Following those would be the guided questions, which can be used to effectively communicate with an insane person. If you wish to try this, I suggest applying a sedative agent before doing so. The corresponding formula is available behind Tinjin City's Channy's Gate. There's also the formulated product. It can be effective in helping you maintain rational thought during the process. Of course, you can also get Dunn to apply for help from the Backland Diocese. I'm very willing to see the spirituality state of an insane sequence 7 psychiatry. Lucidity and rational thought, that's my expertise. I maintained lucidity and rational thought even when my soul was being channeled. Of course, I'm not someone who lets confidence get to my head. I'll still apply for the sedative agent, amantha extract, and eye of the spirit medication. Klein heaved a sigh of relief, a little eager to make the attempt. He put down his newspaper and stood up. He then entered the bathroom and ignited the letter with his spirituality before tossing the ashes into the toilet bowl and flushing them. That night, Klein once again tried the ritual for summoning himself and brought the flaring sun charm back to the physical world and into his room. He also didn't receive Mr. Isaac's letter, even though he had expected a swift reply. Perhaps he needed some time to recall the knowledge, or perhaps he's not free to give a reply for now, or perhaps he's worried that he would interrupt my sleep. Klein dispelled the wall of spirituality as he speculated. He made his way to the bed. The following day, Tuesday morning, Klein entered the Blackthorn Security Company and knocked on the door to the captain's office as usual. "Please come in," Dunn Smith said with a mellow and pleasant voice. Klein turned the doorknob and pushed open the door to see the captain having his breakfast. In his right hand was a cup of coffee, emitting a rich aroma. On the plate in front of him, there was white bread toast and bacon. Dunn placed the remaining sandwich toast with butter into his mouth and ate it. He then silently pointed to the chair opposite his desk. Klein didn't disturb his captain from enjoying his breakfast. With a smile, he sat down as he waited patiently. Dunn saw that he was in no hurry, so he relaxed back into his chair, picked up his coffee to take a sip, and swallowed the food in his mouth. He took a napkin, wiped the corners of his lips, and said, "What's the matter?" Klein nodded seriously and said, "I've met Daxter Guderian, the doctor at the asylum and also member of the psychology alchemist." As he spoke, he caught a glimpse of the magazine that was spread open before the captain. "Did he provide any news?" Dunn asked, crossing his arms. Klein simply described. "He told me that before Hood Eugen went crazy, there was someone who visited him quite frequently. That person's name is Lanevis." "Lanevis?" Dunn massaged his temples. "I seem to have heard of it before. He's the cheat who swindled at least 10,000 pounds, Klein reminded him. Dunn thought for a while, with a serious look on his face. He then shook his head to show that he had no memory of it. "Captain, you're not sensitive at all when it comes to money." Klein lampooned and told him the related story about Lanevis by highlighting the main points. The cheat falsely claimed that he had prospected and purchased an iron mine with rich deposits of iron ore. He raised funds from private individuals in Tingen and swindled more than 10,000 pounds. Someone I know from the divination club suffered a loss from this. In addition, a young woman was swindled into an engagement with him and is now pregnant with his child. He visited Hood Eugen multiple times before he went crazy, Dunn said in thought. Sequence 8 Beyonder Swindler. The Marauder Pathway. Captain, your memory is actually good when it comes to this kind of thing. Klein found it funny as he reflected over it. He nodded faintly and said, that was my guess as well. Because the steelworks company that Lanevis set up was in the South, and the victims were of several different beliefs, the case wasn't passed to us in the end. Even if there had been evidence of Beyonder involvement in the case, it would have been passed over to the mandated punisher. Dunn finally understood the ins and outs of the story. He looked at Klein with his deep gray eyes and said, what do you want to do? Cough, Captain, can you please not be so sensitive? Klein replied with a mask of solemnity. I want to talk to Hood Eugen via mediumship ritual and figure out why Lanevis came looking for him. I want to know if that visit is directly related to him going insane. Dunn nodded slightly and said, even if you hadn't applied to do it, I would have had a similar experiment done when we were certain that Hood Eugen is crazy. However, Dolly told me that it's quite risky. Are you confident? I can ask for assistance from the Backland Diocese. It shouldn't be a problem to delay it for a few days. Klein's main motivation to become a Beyonder was to study mysticism and find a way home. As it was a chance for practical exercise and he was confident enough, he was naturally unwilling to give it up. Captain V mastered knowledge on the subject. I'm confident about this. Of course, peel requires certain ingredients, such as the amantha extract, eye of the spirit medicine, and sedative agent. Sedative agent. Dunn ruminated over the name and confirmed Klein's professionalism. He remembered Dolly mention that it was a liquid medicine that was rarely used, yet was very efficient in mediumship. Dunn Smith pondered for nearly 20 seconds and leaned back into his chair. He said, go ahead and fill out a request form. Then collect what you need from behind Channy's gate. I'm not sure if there are any finished goods. If there aren't any, pick up the ingredients you need and concoct the medicine accordingly. All right, Klein replied happily. He didn't get up but sat firmly in his chair. Dunn massaged his temples. He thought carefully and said, it happens to be my turn to monitor the asylum this evening. We can't visit Hood Eugen directly. No one knows if there are members of the psychology alchemists disguised as doctors, nurses, janitors, or patients in the asylum. No one knows if the psychology alchemists are monitoring Hood Organ either. Any action we take must be secret. We can't expose that Daxter Guderian has become our informant. We'll go at dawn by sneaking in secretly. Yes, I'll keep guard while you perform the ritual to prevent any accidents from happening. That'd be best. If Hood Eugen is just pretending to be crazy, while I use a mediumship ritual on him, it would be like I barged into the zoo and danced before a tiger. Klein relaxed and said sincerely, yes, Captain. He stood up and walked towards the door. Just then, the corner of his eyes noticed the title of the magazine article the captain was reading. Donningsman tree sap in the southern continent's rainforests has had a significant effect on boosting hair growth. Klein retracted his gaze, opened the door, and exited the captain's office. Suddenly, there was a playful thought that flashed through his mind. Actually, a Beyonder doesn't need to go through such trouble. If old Neil was still around, he could design a ritualistic magic for hair regrowth. Then he would pray for the goddess's assistance. Whether one would be covered with hair and become a curly-haired baboon, that's another story. What would the goddess's response be? If it were me, I would definitely curse, mother of Sekur. That thought suddenly tainted Klein's happiness with sadness, but there was also a hint of hilarity in the sadness. He entered the clerk's office and sat before the Ackerson Model 1346 typewriter and finished typing his application. After Dunsmith stamped and signed the application, he took it down to the basement and walked along the tunnel that was lit up with gas lamps towards Channy's gate. Only at that moment did Klein realize something. It would be the first time that he was going beyond the mysterious gate. He wondered what it looks like. He quickened his pace with anticipation and came before the twin doors of the black gate. He first passed his request to Sikatron, who was on duty that day for registration purposes. Then Klein took back the document that now had her signature as well. He knocked on Channy's gate and sensed how empty and distant the echo was. He didn't hear any footsteps, but within half a minute, the gate with 7 dark sacred emblems opened with a creak. Channy's gate opened up to allow a single person's passage before coming to a stop. Klein then walked in with the help of the gas lamps on both sides of the corridor. Behind the gate, there was an elderly man with obvious wrinkles and thinning hair. He was wearing a classic black robe and holding a barn lantern. The dim candlelight shone through the glass, illuminating the elderly man's expressionless face, which was a mixture of light and dark. His light blue eyes were like ice that had been frozen for 1,000 years. "Document," he said with his husky voice. Klein had seen the elderly man before because at dusk every day, he would come out from behind Channy's gate with his partners. They would pass by the duty room and take the hallway leading to St. Selena Cathedral. They were Nighthawks who had aged and volunteered to keep guard inside. According to Klein's understanding, there were 5 of them who were keeping watch. "This is my application." He passed the document in his hands to the elderly man before him. The guard with light blue eyes raised the barn lantern and looked through the request carefully. After he made sure that there were no mistakes, he moved aside and let Klein pass. Klein passed through Channy's gate slowly. He had yet to take a good look around when he felt an indescribably chill. It wasn't the cold of winter, but a chill that would make a human spirituality shiver. Klein lifted his gaze and looked afar. He saw candlesticks appearing on the wall in succession, and there were silver candles with carvings on them. The flames gave out a blue luster without any flickering. Creak. The guard closed Channy's gate, and the surroundings became extremely quiet. There was a broad walkway before Klein, a walkway paved with ancient stone slabs. On both sides of the walkway were stone doors labeled ingredients, medicine, information, and so on. At the end of the walkway, there was a flight of stairs that connected to the lower floors. It extended into the dark, as though it was connected to the abyss. It should be connected to different sealed locations that have sealed artifacts. "I heard that there are a few floors. I wonder which floor contains St. Selena's ashes." Klein adapted to the brightness behind the gate and suddenly felt that there was something shapeless scraping against his skin. They were in strips, and every one of them chilled him to the bone. He shivered, and he couldn't help but activate his spirit vision. Then he looked at the entire area behind Channy's gate. It was filled with fine black lines. They were swaying lightly, occasionally clustered together, occasionally extended. They were tightly knitted without any gaps. This is the sealing power behind Channy's gate." Klein nodded indiscernibly. He reined in his thoughts and followed the guard. They went through a heavy stone door labeled Medicine Room. Very soon, he found the Amantha extract, the eye of the spirit medicine, and the sedative agent by following the alphabet label. He had seen the first 2 before, but it was his first time picking up the latter one. He saw that a blue fluid rippled in the translucent glass bottle. For some reason, looking at the fluid made him feel as though he had entered a mother's embrace. On the bottle, there was a label. It showed the manufacturing date and the expiration date, which was still some time away. Luckily, it can still be used. Klein took the 3 tiny bottles of medicine and walked back to Channy's gate with the guard keeping him company. He shook off the feeling of coldness that reached the deepest corner of his soul, and the creepy experience of being swept by the black line. When Channy's gate closed, he couldn't help but look back. He mumbled to himself, staying in there for a long time would affect both the body and soul, right? TT's no wonder the guards have to volunteer. Around dawn, Klein used a special technique to lock his bedroom. He pushed open his oriel window and jumped down. The 2-story height posed no danger to the present him. He landed steadily without faltering at all. The Nighthawk's carriage was already parked opposite, waiting for him. Without any exchange, Klein quickly arrived at Tingen Asylum in the North Borough. Following the captain's instructions, he took a detour to one of the corners without a street lamp where he saw the waiting Dunn Smith. "Let's go in." Dunn nodded faintly. "I've made sure that there's no one around." "All right." Klein quickly got closer. As a clown entering an asylum, it keeps reminding me of a famous saying. It's like returning home. He mused to himself. He followed Dunn closely. With the aid of the wall's bumpy surface, they somersaulted into the asylum quickly and agilely without standing balance. Dunn turned around and looked. He nodded slightly to give his approval. The 2 of them crouched and silently moved through the hospital's small park and activity square. They then entered the three-story building in the asylum and arrived at the top floor where Hood Eugen's room was. As Hood Eugen had the possibility of becoming violent now that he had gone insane, he had been assigned to a single room. Luckily, the monitoring Nighthawks hadn't wasted their efforts during the surveillance and had made a copy of the room key long ago. Catcha. The lock clicked lightly, and Dunn entered first. Klein projected his gaze past his figure and saw the person sitting on the bed. Hood Eugen's face was long and skinny. His eye sockets were deeply concave, and his blonde hair was disheveled. He was looking at the metal barred window with his grayish-blue eyes. He was looking at the crimson moon outside. Klein closed the door to the room and chuckled as he casually asked, "Why aren't you sleeping?" Dunn was taken aback and suddenly remembered that Klein was now a Sequence 8 clown. Hence, he remained silent and backed off to a corner of the room. Hood Eugen turned his head and looked at Klein. He chuckled foolishly and replied, "I'm waiting for my cake." Waiting for cake. That really wasn't an answer that I was expecting, of course. If I was able to anticipate the answer of a mental patient, wouldn't that mean that I was almost there myself? The thought flashed through Klein's mind. He maintained his relaxed smile, as if he was chatting with a friend. "Who's going to send you a cake?" Hood Eugen's expression fell instantly, his face long and depressed. "No, there's no cake, there's no cake. You stole my cake." His voice suddenly became shrill as he glared angrily at Klein. Without waiting for Klein to speak, he let out a shout and opened his mouth, revealing 2 rows of white teeth. Following which, he leaped from his mattress while salivating. He closed in on Klein with one step and extended his hands, attempting to grab onto Klein's shoulder. He wanted to drag Klein towards him and bite him. Despite the sudden attack, Klein reacted quickly despite appearing a little flustered. He instantly bent his knee and squatted. At the same time, he tilted his body to the side and raised his left arm. Oof! His shoulder slammed into Hood Eugen's abdomen, causing Hood's eyes to turn white and drool to drip from his mouth. But Hood Eugen didn't stop moving. He allowed the momentum to carry him down, as he opened his arms in an attempt to pull Klein into a bear hug. Klein tilted his body to the side and rolled over. His movements were smooth as though he had practiced them hundreds of times. He pushed against the ground with his right hand and stood up with a somersault. He decided to go on the offensive and charged forward to restrain his opponent. But at that moment, Hood Eugen only stood there blankly, his eyes losing focus, becoming vacant and lost. Klein froze for a moment. He turned his head towards the corner of the room, only to see Dunn Smith, wearing a black windbreaker and matching hat, with his hands clasped tightly together and looking down. The captain has dragged Hood Eugen into a dream. Upon realizing this, he stopped his subsequent attack and took the opportunity to take out the silver ritual dagger that couldn't harm anyone. He used it to create a wall of spirituality, which sealed the war. Klein then took out 3 candles infused with mint and placed them on the window in a triangular formation. One candle signified the Evernight goddess, another the mother of the secrets, and the last represented himself. Soon after, he set up a simple altar and used his spirituality to ignite the candle. Just as he was about to warn the captain, Dunn raised his head and smiled. Hood Eugen's dreams are a sea of chaos. There's no way to guide it. Just as he finished his sentence, a luster returned to Hood Eugen's eye. It was no longer vacant. Then the insane psychiatrist moved his waist, letting out a comfortable yawn. Klein was momentarily at a loss, so he remained quiet. He picked up a metal bottle containing the amantha extract. He dripped the transparent liquid extracted from the night vanilla, slumber flower, and chamomile into the flames of the candle representing himself, allowing the serene aroma to spread around the room. Hood Eugen's nervousness, anger, and relief completely vanished. He languidly sat down again on the edge of his bed and looked out at the crimson moon outside the window in a daze. His eyes once again lost their focus as peace was restored. Klein also felt the peace that came with the night. He set the amantha extract down and sat beside Hood Eugen. He wanted to find something to break down Hood's last line of defense. Only with the removal of the last line of defense could he use the eye of the spirit medication to make Hood Eugen's soul slip into a turbid state. After all, I'm not a professional spirit medium. He had already thought of an idea before coming. He fished out a set of tarot cards from his pocket. This set of cards only had the 22 major arcana, so it was easy to carry around. It was a weapon that Klein had successfully applied for. Each of the cards was lined with metal threads made from pure silver. Each of them was able to kill undead beings. Their patterns were complicated and gorgeous, making Klein feel like they were a collector's item and not used against enemies. Klein cut the deck with one hand and smiled at Hood Eugen. "Let's play some card games." "Cards?" Hood Eugen retracted his gaze from outside the window as he repeated the term in a day. Klein didn't answer, placing the deck of tarot cards into Hood's palm with a sincerity that could not be rejected. Hood Eugen mimicked Klein's actions, trying his hardest to cut the deck with one hand to some success. The attention of the mental patient was slowly drawn to the hard, yet flexible, beautifully textured cards in his hand. He flipped over the first card. It was the picture of a man in tattered clothes with his hands tied. He was hanging by his leg with a faint halo at his head. The hanged man, Klein nodded in thought. He took the opportunity to grab the eye of the spirit medicine, dripping the amber liquid onto the candle flame, still the one representing himself. An alcoholic fragrance spread forth, inducing an intoxicated feeling to anyone who took a whiff of it. Hood Eugen spaced out bit by bit, his vision losing its focus. The deck of tarot cards in his hand fell onto the bed. But he remained sitting upright, without slumping over. Klein used cogitation to fight back against the medicine's dreamy effects of turning lightheaded and ethereal. He took out another metal bottle from his pocket and twisted the cap open before pouring the blue liquid into his mouth. Sedative agent. The ice-cold liquid flowed through his throat, down his gullet, and into his stomach. Klein instantly felt unusually awake, without any sense of drowsiness. He slowly exhaled, then familiarly took out the other essential oil extracts and herb powders, dripping them onto the two candles signifying the Evernight goddess. In the faint fog, he took 2 steps back and solemnly murmured in Hermes, "I pray for the power of the dark night. T pray for the power of the mystery. T pray for the goddess's loving grace. T pray that you would allow me to communicate with the spirituality of the Beyonder beside me, Hood Eugen." The incantations reverberated around the room, and Klein saw the flames of the candle, now dyed black, spread outward. He didn't avoid them, nor did he guard against them. He allowed the dark night to envelop him. In this unusually lucid state, he felt his spirit leave the protection of his body and enter a space akin to deep space. All around him was boundless, silent darkness. The sky above him was filled with countless indescribable, transparent figures. There were also streaks of different colors, lustrous splendors that harbored infinite knowledge. The spiritual world, Klein was no longer a stranger to this. Just as he had this thought, a foggy world appeared before him. It was a world enveloped by a faint tornado of light. Klein knew that it represented Hood Eugen's spirit, that represented his body of heart and mind. Thus he leaned over, digging into the wall that was the tornado. In an instant, he saw countless specks of light pelting him. He heard the voices of thousands of people discussing something in whispers. These murmurings were very chaotic and lacked any sense of logic. Some included praises for the elegance of some lady. Then it turned into a description of the feeling of relief after using the toilet. Some started as a weep, then turned into frenzied joy. The insane thoughts latched on and gnawed at Klein's spirit in a bid to assimilate. Klein maintained his lucidity and rationality, quickly flying towards Hood Eugen's spiritual world. "This is like a pleasant concert compared to the horrifying murmurings and howls I hear when entering the world above the gray fog." Klein smiled secretly and made his way through the tornado. He saw a groggy, translucent Hood Eugen. The Sequence 7 psychiatrist maintained the same state as he was in the outside world. He looked over with a dazed expression. Klein stopped before him and asked softly, "Do you know Lanvis?" Hood Eugen replied blankly, "Yes." The light around them underwent a transformation, as if Hood Eugen was revealing his spiritual sea. Quickly, the intertwining light revealed a bespectacled, average-looking man who wore a sarcastic smile. It was the same Lanvis whom Klein had seen in the arrest warrant. Klein nodded in satisfaction and collected himself. He asked a guided question, "Why did Lanvis look for you?" He said. Hood Eugen's voice slowly turned soft. Suddenly, he changed into a more charismatic voice and laughed a little maniacally. "Hood Eugen, this is the worst era, but also the best era. As long as you seize the opportunity, we can become the rulers of this world. We can become true immortals. As long as you are willing to help, PLL not only tell you the way to master your potion and avoid losing control, I'll also promise that you'll receive godhood qualities in the future, immortal godhood qualities. You should be able to see the presence behind me. My promise is his promise. In some sense, the psychology alchemists are connected to him. Do not doubt. The psychology alchemists aren't strong enough at the moment. It is unable to provide you with enough help unless you are willing to stay at this level for the rest of your life. The method to grasp your potion without losing control. Why does this sound like how I entice others with the acting method? Lanevis sure has lofty ambition. He's only a sequence 8, yet he's already talking about manipulating godhood qualities, just what hidden presence is backing him. This guy seems to be plotting something, which isn't solely just to cheat people out of their money, or could running scams just be his hobby? Klein had many thoughts as he listened on. When Hood Eugen stopped talking, he quickly pressed on. What kind of assistance did Lanevis want you to provide? Hood Eugen didn't answer immediately. His spiritual world turned silent. He then broke out into laughter. He replied erratically, help, help, help. I provided help. I provided help. He made. His words came to an abrupt halt as his blurry soul contorted. The light and darkness of the surroundings which represented the spiritual sea quickly turned incorporeal, forming a sinister, scary, dark altar. On top of the altar was a cross. There seemed to be something hanging on the cross, as well as things that appeared indiscernible piled at the bottom. The light and darkness alternated, and as the hanging item was about to become clearer, the entire spiritual world shook, as if it was experiencing a magnitude 10 earthquake. Holy shit! Klein had a premonition that something dangerous was about to happen. Without thinking, he turned and flew towards the chaotic tornado of thoughts in an attempt to escape. Captain countless rays of brilliance drowned Klein as ravings of a million people filled his ear. However, Klein thought nothing of it. His abilities as a clown told him that his spirit was being engulfed by a black shadow that was rapidly expanding. The black shadow was a huge cross, and there seemed to be a person hanging upside down on it. Catcha! The chaotic tornado of thoughts unleashed its load outwards and turned uniform. Slowly, Hood Eugen's spiritual world disintegrated. Klein noticed that he had exceeded his fastest flying speed from his previous trial. His soul had become significantly stronger after he briefly mixed with some of the strength from the mysterious space above the gray fog. Just as the cross's shadow was about to engulf him entirely, he dashed out of the blurry world and felt his body. He familiarly stimulated a descent, and Hood Eugen's long skinny face and messy blonde hair instantly appeared in his vision, along with the 3 candles that were burning at the window ledge. He had managed to get out of the mediumship state in time. In that instant, he saw black scales growing one after another on Hood Eugen's face. His vacant pupils turned into slits, becoming extremely cool and ruthless. Oh shit! He's going to lose control. Klein's pupils constricted, and before he could react, he saw a figure in a knee-length black windbreaker and silk top hat take 2 huge strides before Hood Eugen. He then raised the revolver and pushed it against the man's head. Bang! 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 Dunsmith fired 5 bullets consecutively. Hood Eugen's head suddenly blew up like a watermelon falling down from a high height. The red and white rainstorm splattered across each and every corner of the room. He had taken care of Hood Eugen before he lost control completely. Klein, who was 50 centimeters away, was covered in blood and dirt. He looked at Dunsmith in a daze, only having the feeling that the captain was very handsome at that moment. As long as you ignore his memory problems, the captain is very trustworthy, he complimented sincerely from the bottom of his heart. Did an accident happen? Dunn put away his revolver and watched Hood Eugen's mostly headless body slowly fall to the floor. Just as Klein was about to organize his words, he saw that the body had become a pile of bloody flesh within a few seconds, and the asylum uniform that covered it appeared to have its most basic structure damaged. Hood Eugen's corpse was left with very few complete items. There were dozens of scales twinkling with a black shimmer, and his heart that had turned crystalline and faint blue. The heart had a magical luster, like a diamond refracting incoming light. It could calm someone down or make them restless. It could create tension or develop chaos. But other than that, there was nothing notable. This item should be controllable. After Dunn holstered his revolver, he took out a black glove and wore it on his right hand. He then squatted down to pick up the crystalline heart. A controllable item, according to what the captain previously mentioned. It could be used as the main ingredient for the formula of a sequence 7 psychiatrist, but would it lead to the advanced Beyonder losing control even more easily? Klein took out his handkerchief to wipe the blood from his face and body. He then picked up his specially made tarot cards and cleaned their surfaces. He looked at the ground and asked curiously, what kind of items would these black scales be considered as? These are ingredients that are contaminated with Beyonder power. They could be made into items that have long-lasting effects. For example, our demon-hunting bullet's ability to injure dead spirits or monsters would decrease drastically as soon as they pass the 3 months mark, leaving only a tiny portion of demon-hunting characteristics in the remnant material. If the materials used were something like the black scales, the effective period would be as long as a year or two, and the effects would be even better. Of course, due to their characteristics, the black scales are obviously not suitable to be made into demon-hunting bullets, Dunn explained as he took a piece of paper from Klein to wrap the blue heart and black scale. TT's just like the materials we use as supplementary ingredients for the potion. Klein asked. Dunn stood back up and nodded slightly. Yes. Someone who loses control will really become a monster, Klein sighed. He seized the opportunity while the room was still sealed with a wall of spirituality and quickly described his encounter in Eugen's mind. When I was communicating with Hood Eugen's spirit, I saw a figure like the true creator in his mind. But it was different from the mainstream ones. It wasn't the chain-bound hanged giant, nor was it the eye behind the shadow curtain. Instead, it was similar to the one you saw in Hannes Vincent's dream. Hannes Vincent was a member of the Aurora Order. As Melissa's friend, Selene, had peeked at his incantations and completed the magic mirror divination, it led to the Nighthawk's investigation of it. Dunn Smith saw something close to the true creator in his dream, but it was a different image than the mainstream image that was widely circulated. In the end, the result was an injury and a strange death. When Hood Eugen flipped over the tarot card of the Hanged Man, Klein had actually already expected it. But he never thought it would be presented in such a way. Of course, it was only indirect contact. It wouldn't be comparable to the time he had spied on the eternal blazing sun directly. The worst outcome was just mild injury or mild corruption. As he listened to Klein's description, Dunn's expression became solemn. He knitted his eyebrows and said with a deep voice, a huge cross, black nails, a naked man covered in blood hanging upside down. T didn't see it clearly. That's also the reason why I'm not injured. I only noticed a huge cross and figure similar to a man being hung upside down, Klein replied tactfully. At that moment, all he cared about was fleeing. Seemingly in thought, Dunn nodded and said, Lainvis's visit to Hood Eugen was related to the true creator. So the Aurora Order is involved. Klein quickly repeated the conversation he'd had during the communication. Lainvis tempted Hood Eugen with the acting method and a so-called immortal godhood. But I don't understand why he said that it was the worst of times and also the best of times. Perhaps it was just the way he speaks as a swindler. The help Hood Eugen provided involved a sinister and dark altar. I suspect that Lainvis is plotting something terrifying. Then, his heart stirred as he spoke. Captain, do you remember the letter written to Mr. Z? The letter that the member from the Aurora Order, whom I killed, carried. He mentioned in the letter that he was waiting for an appropriate opportunity, something about the arrival of the end of days. He will offer all the lambs in Tingen to his so-called god. Would this be related to Lainvis's plot? Could Lainvis be the Mr. Z from the Aurora Order? Dunn Smith thought carefully and said, I don't think so. Lainvis couldn't be Mr. Z. Otherwise, he wouldn't be setting up a fake steelworks company to scam people while the Aurora Order was up to something. It would introduce too many variables in his main mission. If anything went wrong with the scam, he would draw the attention of the police and us. He would have to run away from Tingen and abandon his plan. Of course, if he was just insane, it would be perfectly normal for him to act illogically. But judging from the scam he set up, the calmness and cunningness with which he swept away the money doesn't make him look like a real lunatic. So I don't think he's Mr. Z from the Aurora Order. Of course, he might really be involved in the matter as mentioned in the letter. The one offering all the lambs in Tingen to the so-called god. Upon saying that, Dunn paused, then paced back and forth as he said, this incident might have quite severe repercussions. You have to reinvestigate Lainvis and get some clue. Let's clean up the scene and cover up any evidence here. Let everyone know that Hood Eugen died, but leave no clue as to who killed him. This should lead to action by the psychology alchemists or other beyonders that are paying attention to the asylum. They might know something. The Lanevis scam is either still in the hands of the police department or transferred to the mandated punisher. We'll join the investigations by saying that we obtained clues while investigating the Aurora Order. Then we'll work together with the mandated punishers and the machinery hive. We'll concentrate the forces in Tingen and investigate everything and anyone associated with Lanevis. We can request assistance from Backland Diocese and the Holy Cathedral if it's necessary. After that, Dunn turned his head sideways to look at Klein. He ruminated and said, "Do you have anything that you'd like to add?" "Captain, you basically said it all." Klein shook his head solemnly. "No." He hurriedly used ritualistic magic to remove some of the necessary traces with the aid of the simple altar that he had yet to clear in order to ensure that no one would be able to tell that they were the ones who killed Hood Eugen. Then he put away his ingredients, blew out the candles, removed the wall of spirituality, and left the ward in silence with Dunn Smith. They left the asylum by climbing over its wall. "Go back and rest." Dunn stood at a corner without a street lamp. He pressed his black silk hat and said, "There are many things that can only be done tomorrow." "All right." Klein wasn't a sleepless, who only slept 2 to 3 hours a day. He immediately bade farewell to the captain and took the Nighthawk's dedicated carriage that was waiting nearby and returned to Daffodil Street. Before he entered the carriage, he turned back to take a glance. He saw the captain still standing in the dark, which even the moonlight couldn't touch. He appeared to be thinking in silence. The streets were quiet and void of people before dawn. The carriage tore through the streets, sometimes going straight, sometimes taking turns. Klein was pondering about Lanevis when suddenly he felt as if he was in a trance. He saw that the color before his eyes became saturated. The reds became redder and the blacks became blacker, just like an impressionist's oil painting. The surroundings slowed down, and the carriage seemed to enter a strange world. Klein grabbed his flaring sun charm and drew his revolver. Just then, a huge, white, bony palm extended through the carriage window and threw in a neatly folded letter. Then the palm pulled back and vanished. The oil painting-like scene suddenly returned to normal, while the carriage was still driving along the street steadily. "It's a really well-hidden method." Klein looked at the letter by the side of his foot as the corner of his lips twitched.